This is Duke University.
Hello, I'm Dan Vermeer, the Executive Director for the Center for Energy Development and the Global Environment at Duke University. I'm really pleased today to have Glenn Prickett, the Chief External Affairs Officer for the Nature Conservancy, with us today. Glenn will be part of our EDGE seminar series, and really looking forward to hearing his insights on the evolution of conservation and the use of investing in nature as a mechanism for preserving nature. I'd like to start today, Glenn, with a question. The conservation movement has continued to evolve over the last couple of decades in some really interesting ways and raising some really interesting issues. Historically, maybe more focused on conserving natural spaces. That's still very much a priority, but in a world moving toward 10 billion people, all wanting a middle-class quality of life, what's the kind of latest thinking on how an organization like Nature Conservancy takes on the challenge of conservation?
Well, thanks, Dan, and it's great to be here at the Fuqua School at Duke. I've been in the conservation field my whole career, 25 years now, and the mission hasn't really changed. So the Nature Conservancy, groups like us, are really here to protect the lands and the water and the air that all life depends on. But I think our approach has changed. When I started, and when the organization got going back in the 1900s, I think the idea really was to protect nature from people, and that was appropriate at that time. There was a lot of development going on that wasn't really thinking about its environmental impact, so the environmental movement, the conservation movement, really sprang up to try to check that development and preserve nature, preserve open spaces. And that continues to be the mission, but increasingly in a growing world, we're thinking about how do we protect nature for people so that economic development and conservation can really go hand in hand. So you see different kind of work that we do, different projects that we do, really thinking about the value of nature for people. Nature, of course, has value in its own right, and that attracts people like me to the movement who love nature, and we're grateful for a lot of supporters who do. But alone, that's probably not enough to achieve our mission. We need to think about the value that nature provides people and how we can broaden the movement of people who care about nature because it benefits them.
So tell me a little bit about what Nature Conservancy's primary goals are and what success will look like if you're really successful at the mission that you set out for yourself.
So for the Nature Conservancy, success will be protecting land and water and natural ecosystems at a big enough scale that they remain healthy. And that is much bigger than an individual preserve that we might buy or even a large national park that we might help set aside. We need to look at a whole system, so the Amazon rainforest or the Coral Triangle region of Southeast Asia or the Mississippi River here in the United States. So these are vast areas where there can be where there needs to be some strictly protected areas that are untouched or off limits to development. But in a lot of those areas, there will be development. There will be agriculture, farming, ranching, energy development, infrastructure. So success to us is a healthy landscape or river or seascape where there's a mix of conservation and development, but the development is going on in a way that's environmentally sustainable.
Interesting. I'm sure a key factor in the success of this mission is to be able to direct investment, financial dollars toward this mission at scale. You're talking about very large-scale kinds of interventions. How do you think about shifting capital in ways that are consistent with this mission?
So that's a big part of the Nature Conservancy. From the beginning, we've thought about how do we move capital, investment capital, into conservation. And in the early days, it was largely philanthropic. We depended on donations from generous individuals and even companies who wanted to do the right thing for nature. But as our ambition has grown, as the scale of work we want to do grows, we can't rely only on philanthropy, as important as that is. So a big new approach for us is to think about investing in nature as infrastructure, essentially investing in the services that nature provides, whether that's clean water that a city needs, or buffering storm damage along a coastline, or even taking carbon and other pollutants out of the air. Nature provides value to people, and we're trying to figure out how do you monetize that value so we can actually attract private capital or public investment capital into nature conservation that will pay a return in the form of those that benefits from nature.
Right, that's a really provocative idea. I think historically people have thought about nature and the world of investment, the world of capital as being quite different. You're bringing them together in a kind of a new synthesis. Can you give us some specific examples of what this kind of investment looks like on the ground?
Sure. Well, one of the most exciting ones that we've worked on over the last 20 years now is what we call water funds. So the idea actually originated in the United States, in the state and the city of New York, when in the last century the city was thinking about how to provide clean water to the city coming out of the Catskill Mountains. They realized it would be cheaper to protect and restore some of the watersheds upstream of New York City rather than to build a new water treatment plant. So our Nature Conservancy team took that idea to Latin America, and fast forward 20 years, we're now working in 40 cities across Latin America to basically work with the water utilities, bottling companies like Coca-Cola, your former employer, to put capital upstream into the watershed, to work with farmers to protect their streams, to restore the forests along their streams, to keep pollution out of the water and to keep the water flowing more reliably. And that turns out to be cheaper for the downstream water users than building another storage reservoir or building another water treatment plant.
So one of the things that Nature Conservancy is really known for is the kind of innovative partnerships that you've created with business. Can you talk a little bit about how that fits in your strategy, the kinds of relationships that you're trying to build with business, and what that allows you to do, and maybe also what kind of risks come with those relationships as a conservation organization?
Sure. So one thing I love about the Nature Conservancy, we've always been very practical, and we've always been focused on working with the communities where we operate to figure out conservation successes that are also economic successes for that community. And that applies to business. So we've partnered with businesses for decades. A lot of that historically was philanthropic. More and more we're looking at real business partnerships where the company actually achieves some value out of the conservation work, whether it's helping protect an asset from storm damage or providing water for their facilities. So we're doing work with companies like Coca-Cola and Dow Chemical and Cargill in a variety of ways to show the value of nature to their business.
Do you see companies becoming more enlightened about these issues? Do they understand the kind of role that nature plays in their business, and are they willing to really invest in a real way as opposed to just a philanthropic kind of engagement like they have historically? How do you see the kind of evolution of the thinking inside the companies that you're talking with?
Well, I think generally there's been a huge shift. I think about when I started in this field back in the late 80s, early 1990s, you can count on one hand the number of companies that really thought strategically about the environment. We saw a big shift about 10 years ago. A couple of things happened. Hurricane Katrina hit in this country. Climate change became a front page issue. And right around that time, Walmart became one of the first companies to launch a very significant sustainability initiative. But other companies like General Electric and DuPont were doing similar things. And that was really a wake-up call, I think, to corporate leaders around the world. And so we've seen over the last 10 years a much greater focus on sustainability broadly as a business issue. What we're starting to see just over the last couple of years is a focus on nature. So in the early stages of sustainability, there was obviously a lot of focus on waste reduction, energy efficiency, clean technology, and that's all, of course, very important. More recently, the more far-sighted companies have started to look at nature itself as a source of economic value. We're pretty excited about that. Until now, that concept has been pretty theoretical. Well, of course, it's real. It's not theoretical. We all know nature is valuable. In fact, nature is priceless and provides air and water and so forth. But capturing that into the market has been largely theoretical. Now we're starting to see companies like Dow Chemical that we're working with really think in a very practical way about what value does nature provide for one of their manufacturing facilities? How can they capture that? How can they take that right to the bottom line? So it's a growing movement, and we're pretty excited about it.
Do you think companies are doing a good job of wrestling with the kind of the short-term pressures that they're under versus some of these things, which the payoff probably is quite long-term? Is that a tension that you see in the companies that you're working with?
Well, I think that's true in any area of innovation. But interestingly, the payoffs aren't always that long-term. So I mentioned Dow, a company we're working with. This idea arose in that company, like a lot of things do, not from the great minds of the center, as great as they are, but from an engineer in one of their plants who thought, I might be able to solve a problem more cheaply with natural capital than built capital. And he took a risk, and instead of building a water treatment plant to deal with wastewater, he restored a natural wetland and was able to avoid about $40 million of cost. And that played out in a very short time frame, and that caught the attention of the folks at the corporate level in Dow. So in some senses, these are big ideas that can take a while to show value, but there are some practical applications that can show value very quickly.
That's great. So another piece of the equation is what the role of policy is in all of this. A lot of these issues historically were the domain of government. Government set the rules, they set the limits, they set the regulations, and the role of businesses was to play within those boundaries.
Right.
Do you see the role of public policy as critical complement to the kind of work that you're doing? Or what's Nature Conservancy's kind of policy engagement strategy?
Right, so we need to have both. I love my job because I'm responsible both for our public policy and for our corporate sustainability engagements. And the way I look at it, we're not going to succeed in our mission if we don't have both of those things going on at the same time. While nature has economic value, and increasingly we can recognize that in the marketplace, you can't capture all of the value of nature in the market. And a species that's gone extinct, no amount of money can bring that back, for example. So there is a role for government and for public policy to protect some of the environmental values that the market doesn't recognize. But the more we can show with enlightened companies that nature has value, the farther we can get before regulation, and the more politically likely we are to get the regulation if we have business lobbying at our side. So we see the two things going together very much.
It's interesting. It's an area that I hear my students informally debate all the time, which is their theory of change. How does change happen in the world? Is it driven by the private sector? Does government have to need to move first? And what that dynamic of interaction is. So I think what you're laying out is that it's a kind of catalytic process where business and policy both play a role, and that there's kind of a dynamic interaction with them over time. Have you seen that happen in the areas that you're working, that new policies come in place because of what you're able to demonstrate working with companies on some of these issues?
Absolutely. A couple of examples come to mind. One right now, we're working in the country of Mongolia, which is a vast country with a relatively small population and a very large area of grasslands and desert. And the people there rely on the grasslands traditionally for grazing. Mongolia also has a very rich mineral endowment. So there's a mining boom going on, but there's of course a potential conflict between the traditional grazing interests of the grasslands and the mining that could go on. So the government there is aware of that conflict. Of course, they want to develop the mining. We're testing an approach with Rio Tinto, one of the big global mining companies that's building one of the first mines there that we call development by design, how they can build their mine with minimum environmental impact and help to conserve some of the natural grasslands around it. The government is watching that pilot project very closely, and if we can be successful with that first mining project, the government is very interested to step in and make that approach a policy for all mines across the country. They're not really comfortable to do that until it's been proven out by a voluntary effort, in this case Rio Tinto's voluntary effort. So that's an example of that, where you have both things operating at the same time, the voluntary corporate initiative followed by the public policy that can bring it up to scale.
Well, this ecology is getting more and more complex and more interesting all the time. Glenn, I'm really pleased to have you here and for the conversation that we had today, and look forward to hearing more from you in this seminar. Really pleased that Glenn was able to join us for this, and look forward to bringing him back soon to engage our students in discussions of nature and natural infrastructure in deeper ways. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Dan.